Lovely. Make yourself comfortable. Rubbing your hands together. And then just tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Your shoulder and arm. Side. Part of your chest. Belly. And your legs. Okay. Right. Settle back in the chair. Let your weight drop back. Soften your knees. So although the legs are fairly straight, they're not locked, they're still fairly curved. Letting your weight drop back. A couple of slow, gentle breaths. Just feel the build up of your breath. You may want to put your hands just on your belly. Feel that slight expansion, first in your belly, then in your solar plexus, then up in your chest. So your upper body sort of expands upwards and outwards, like a spiral or a tornado expanding out. And just try and get a sense for that. That's a kind of process that in one way or another is followed in many of the movements. Just feel the quality of your breath being something quite soothing. Just your weight drop back into the chair. And sometimes at a stage like this, I think it's worth just thinking to yourself, well, is there anything you particularly need from the session? I know that sounds a bit vague, but we don't have to go to every Tai Chi class with the kind of, I'm going to learn this and I'm going to develop this and I'm going to do that. It's good to do that sometimes, but it's also good sometimes to think, well, is this what I want to do at the moment? In my own practice, I have certain things that I'm trying to develop, certain goals, if you like to think of it like that. But on any given day, exactly what I do will be tempered by, well, how do I feel and where do I want to go with this? So over a period of time, I will fulfill certain things that I'm looking to develop. But from day to day, it's more a matter of what can Tai Chi give me, if that makes sense. So then coming to the upright position, and again, just giving consideration to your stance. Notice these parallel lines, shoulders to hips, to the outside of your knees and to your ankles. Now that can have some variation. You can have your feet there or a little bit further in, but try not to have your feet like that. So hip width is how we would normally define this. You've got a little bit of leeway, and most of the stances that we take will involve this stance. There's a couple when we do scooping the seat and grasping the tiger's ears, where more out on the diagonal line. In fact, I can turn around just to, if I look at the corner, then if I go to the diagonal line, it'll be more like this, and you'll see it's a little bit narrower. It's kind of half hip width. If it was full hip width, it would be over there somewhere. It'd be quite uncomfortable, and also direction would start to go astray. So it, you know, half hip width is a guideline. When we come to those movements, you have this comfortable, don't cause any straining or stiffening around your hip. And then just once again settling in, let me get the feet right, hips sinking down, and just feel that, just like opening up through your back, head sitting nicely on the spine, and slowly turning your head. And then the shoulders, and going forwards. And then hands down to your sides, so they're just sliding around a pillar or a ball. Not actually moving forwards and backwards. If I do this from the side, you'll see my arms are hanging down just by my hip, and the elbows out a little bit, and so it does that. Trying to avoid doing this. It's that thing about the arm hanging from the shoulder that is important. It may or may not be quite level with your hips, depends exactly how you're sitting. And we determine that with this next exercise. So easing forwards and pushing back. Now, as you do this, the further you go forwards, the stronger the pull forwards. And at a certain point, if you kept moving your head forwards, you'd have to strain and stiffen up so that you didn't fall out the chair. Going back, if you were to keep going back, apart from the back of the chair, sooner or later the same thing would happen. So we want to avoid that straining. You will feel, for instance, as you go forwards, that the muscles in your back are working a little bit harder. And as you go back, that eases, and so on and so forth. There's various things in the body. But we want to make a distinction between a muscle that's under load, but still comfortable, and one that is just being brought to the edge of its capacity and is beginning to stiffen up. And that's when we've started to go too far. So the exact final posture here can be a very personal thing. You're using your feet to push yourself back up, but there's also that pull from the hips. And if you just come to rest here for a moment, then roughly speaking, you've got 2/3 of your weight back in your hips and a third in your feet. But again, it can be variable. What you're really looking for is a sense that feeling of pulling in the front and the feeling of pulling in your back are equal. So rather than think, well, is this 2/3 or not? Sometimes it's better to think, is there that sense of equilibrium there? And so long as you can feel a bit of weight in your feet, that's the thing to go for. But now you turn, and this brings in that differential between the sides as well. So you go forwards and backwards. This time you turn in the other direction, turning in that middle part of your body, your hips, your waist, not just pulling your shoulders around. and then circling. Imagine your head just staying within the square that is formed by your feet and your hips at the corners. Letting your hips sink down. A nice soft feeling in your back and spine. Weight moving from foot to foot back into your hip. Turn in so it goes into your other hip and then forwards to the first foot. And then change direction. And then just make the circle smaller until you just once again arrive at that point of equilibrium. Like water spiraling down a plug hole. And you just come to rest. Now, the feet, somebody asked a question about the stepping stance. And there's actually two sets of answers. One applies to the seated, one applies to the standing. Because undoubtedly in the chair, your hips are weight bearing, even though we're letting the weight go through the hips, the weight's still there. You just have less maneuverability for your legs in the chair. So there's various ways that this might be done. First of all, just taking a step forwards, and it won't be as long a step. It's unlikely to be as long a step as if you're standing. The leg just expanding out. Now you see that what I'm tending to do is step straight forward. So in this stance, I'm actually able to maintain the hip width. You won't see me do that every time. A lot depends on if I'm a bit stiff in my hips. That might be quite difficult. So I might just have it a bit narrower, maybe even come across slightly, or sometimes maybe even out. It can be quite variable. As I say, this can be sometimes easier than that. If that is causing your hip to tighten up in the side, which for some people it can, that might be easier because it helps to relax the muscles on the outside. The other thing you may see me do, and again, this is quite difficult in the chair because of that thing with the hip and the weight, but is to bring the foot in and out like this, to create a semicircle. This is something that is more significant when we stand. And it's, yeah, you can try it, but recognize that it can be quite strong. This little movement is quite strong on your hip. So probably the most straightforward way is to go forwards, straight forwards, maintaining the width of the step, and possibly a little bit out to the side. I'm not too bothered about that because, as I said, we only really have the leg extended in the main body of exercises once, and this would be where you had it extended to. You can still do that little bit of a circular movement if that's comfortable for you. But the main thing with the stepping in the chair is to get a sense for how far you can extend the leg without straining the hip, keep the knee bent, and at this point, just apply a little bit of pressure downwards through your foot. So if I go to here, I feel that it's pulling on my hip a bit, and I can't really apply that pressure. But if I'm here, I can apply that pressure. So that's the main criteria that we're thinking of, rather than the width of the step, because that can be quite variable. It's important that you feel comfortable. And then same thing on the other side. Try different ways. It is worth bearing in mind that the overall direction of the movement should be in the same direction as the toes are pointing. But again, that's not particularly significant because there's only two movements where we do actually go out to the side. Remember that little push down. Good, and then so come back to the basic stance. Wait forwards a little bit. Now, when we go into bird pose, it's very, so turn your hands palm forwards. I made the point that the hand hangs from, the arm hangs from your shoulder. So when I tilt forwards, I go to here. There's a strong temptation to do this, sort of like that. But what I really want you to do is to discover how much movement there is in your arm and your hand, and how that movement is produced in this particular exercise. We develop it later in some of the other exercises. And for me, a significant factor here is going to be that when I go to here, I've got this sort of opening across the chest. And when I'm here, the chest is contracted inward, but my back is open. Now, you may feel it elsewhere, but they seem to me to be quite key sort of areas of the body. So there's a great deal of activities, a great deal of energy, movement in your arms and your hands, but really very little effort. They're hanging, the elbows are out a little bit, but a good proportion of the effort required to create the rotating movement, as we're discovering, is seated in chest and upper back. And so we start to get a nice sense of flow, not by the arms, but through the arms. Now that flow through your arms will begin to express itself from the arms. And it'll be much more sustainable than any, if we were trying to do these kind of fancy movements, then your arms would just end up aching. Now, with all that remaining in mind, when we make the change to fisherman cast the net, so next time you come forwards, set your hand hang down. You move back, but now you imagine that you're in water, so the pressure of the water holds your arm back. You just let the hand flow through. By this time, you're already going forward, so now your hand has, it stopped. It's going this way, and because the shoulder's gone forward, they kind of pass each other. But then eventually the shoulder will pull the hand through, and it starts to swing up, but now the shoulder's going back. It's only slightly ahead, but remember, it's like the pressure of the water is actually restraining your arm a little bit. Now that extra movement, that differential between shoulder and hip, creates a much bigger swing, or creates a swing that we didn't have in the previous exercise. And again, a lot of that is down to what's happening in chest and upper back. You might want to do that with just one arm, just to see if it works for you in one arm. But eventually, of course, the fishermen cast the net, they have to do it in both arms. And so we get a kind of quite organic build-up of energy, simply because the nature of something swinging, sort of momentum. Because if I start pushing somebody on the swing, you push somebody on the swing, you really go up and kind of get a good shove. You kind of get it going, and you push it a little bit harder, and you push it a little bit harder, and suddenly the swing's swinging forwards and backwards. It's swinging, isn't it? So this shouldn't involve any kind of straining on the part of your arms, and so that flowing quality that was building up within the arms itself is maintained. This is fisherman cast the net, feeling the movement as much as possible through your back and your spine as well. Movement starting in your hips, a little bit of a push from the hips, push the shoulders forwards, and then push from the feet to push them back. So in a sense, you could say that we're building on the accumulation of that movement within the arms that we got in the previous exercise. Just giving it a little bit more freedom. The next movement is rolling the ball in towards the chest. And once again, to begin with, The first stage of the movement, we hold the arm in a position and we come back. And you can see that draws my hand up, and then the elbow drops down. And that gives me a small circle, it's a small ball at the moment. But again, in the process of doing that, we recognize changes within the body. I always feel that there's an opening up, an expansion coming up, building up to my belly and my chest. Much like we might do, as I said earlier, in the breathing. And that helps to draw my hand over a bigger ball without straining the shoulder. Again, this is down the course of both hands normally. So we've got a bit more movement now in the arms, and this nice opening feeling in the front of the body, but we still retain that same quiet quality. One more time. Now going into the pigeon spreads its wings. You get to about this position, rotate your arms so your hands are palming, let your elbows drop, and then again feel the expansion in the chest, the contraction across your upper back, and then reversing that as you go forwards. So the main effort on the part of your arms at the moment is to maintain this shape. Not to do this, but if you just maintain the shape, the movement in the rest of the body will move your arms for you. That's quite hard, actually, because it's quite strong down that part of the arm. We're just doing our best to keep the muscles soft, free from that tightening quality. One more. So again, building on this, keeping your hands just above the height of your hip, letting your elbows go out, but fingers pointing towards each other. Then the hands rotate, elbows drop, and pushing away. Coming back. Don't let your hands go behind your hips or your shoulders. Just have them go out a bit. Feel the opening in the chest. Press forward. One more time. And in a way, there's even less forwards and backward movement. The next exercise, roll your hands into a hollow fist. You should be able to get your finger down there. Your hands are just above the height of your leg. And you come back and you rotate, and your elbow goes back towards your hip, but not behind your hip. The arm rotates. Again, you'll feel that little bit of opening and closing in your chest and your upper back. And the spiraling movement seems to absorb some of the forward and backward energy. So again, opening and closing in chest and upper back. So basically, the last three exercises are very similar. The basic movement is the movement of your weight. and that's accompanied by this opening and closing movement. It's exaggerated, of course, in the chest. And naturally enough, if the sternum goes forward, that pulls my shoulders back. And so I start to get that little bit of movement in the upper back as well. So this time, from here, come back into pigeon spread its wings, followed by pushing the wave, and then punch with both hands. So subtle changes and variations in the upper part of your body, around your shoulders, chest, and upper back. Nice and easy and fluid. Do one more round. And then open your fingers, turn your hands out a little bit more, winding back. One more time. Bring your hands back and polishing the table, turning, easing forwards. So this first set of exercises all work on a horizontal plane, and it's fairly straightforward to feel the mechanical connections in the body. Now I turn, I lean forward. Obviously my arms and hands are going to go with me. But try and feel not just, if you like, the mechanics of the movement, but also the sense of movements through those mechanics. Because when we come to the next set of movements, as we're about to do, they're vertical. There isn't the same obvious connection. It's much more subtle. Turn your hands palm up. Another way you can think of this before we start these, if I show you from the side, if I'm doing, say, pushing the wave, I'm doing this back. So I'm pushing from my hips. The wave comes up, if you like to think of it like that, comes through into the front of my body, and everything is moved forwards. Now I'm sinking into my legs, and again, they push back, and the wave comes up and pushes me back. Now, if I push from the hip and the foot, and it's a very gentle push, then the two waves will arise together, and what will happen? They'll meet in the middle. And when two waves meet, they do this. They go up in the air, and that gives us that momentum, that energy for the upward movement. So that sounds a bit complex, but basically you push down through your feet and your hips, and what you get is an upward movement. If I exaggerate it a great deal, then I push through my hips, I push through my feet, and there's enough of an upward movement for me to stand up. So, you know, and again, I'm not suggesting you that. You only want that sense of an expansion up through your body. It's difficult to do that, and it's very easy to slip into just doing this movement with your arms. But when you do that, you will lose the quality of the movement. And then hands down to your sides and the wild goose. One more time. Now we add a little bit of forward movement, just to let the hands go in front of our knees. We come back and we have the same push up. Just gradually becoming more familiar with what we might think of as the internal movements and the feel of those movements, particularly in the upper part of the body. And then your hands come down and push up. Pull down. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Push through your foot and your hip provides that upward movement. We feel the lovely extension through the side of the body. Let your shoulder drop. Try not to do this. And pull down. Change, stop from side to side. And then just cast your mind back to the basic stance. Can you still feel that 2/3 of your weight back in your hips? Are your feet still in position? It's quite strange watching people in a class because they've got so caught up with this movement or whatever the arms are doing. They'll be doing this and this will happen or something like that because we're accustomed to putting our feet in certain places and chairs and that, you know. I don't think I've ever seen anybody cross their legs, but it's come very close sometimes. We'll see if you can just come back to this. Remind yourself not to let your feet just kind of drift away from your awareness. You may decide in the end that you want something underneath your feet to just raise them up a little bit, to make it easier to feel their contact downwards. So one more time. And then pushing in 2 directions. So now pushing up. And then out. Try not to shortcut the withdrawing movement. Wait till you get your hands back here before you start the next movement. And we're going to change to scooping the sea and looking at the sky. So bring your hand out, extend one foot. This is where we go out on the diagonal, and it's just a heel on the floor. Just find a comfortable position. Trying to go out too far, but remember now we're easing forwards. The weight stays mostly back, a little bit of pressure in the heel, and then drawing back, opening out. So because your leg has gone out, those parameters of the movement, how far you can go forward, to an extent, how far you can go back, have opened out a little bit. And that's important to realize how that has happened. We're getting a bigger movement, not simply because we're moving more in our arms or even our back, but because we've changed the position of the legs. And that's very significant. It may not seem that way here, but when we come to the standing, of course, it will be tremendously significant. And then hands twisted and grasping the tiger ball. Good. Now switch to the other side. Same thing, do my knees slightly bent. Now change into grasping the tiger's ears. Remember, knee slightly curved still. Trying as much as you can to move out along the line of the leg. And that's something else that may affect the angle of the leg. I might be able to have my leg out here, but actually moving there is quite difficult. So it's on a forward diagonal. One more time. And then come back to sitting. When we stand, some things will change in terms of the structure, the physical mechanics, if you like. But the feeling remains. This movement downwards through your body, nice open feeling in the upper body, and whatever other associations you have with this. These are what we're trying to take into the standing exercise. Okay, so rubbing your hands together. And then tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and your arm. The other side. chest, your belly, and your legs. So if you'd like to stand, standing up. So again, let me give you a little bit more detail on the actual stances. This is something that we move towards. So if you try to get it right and it doesn't feel comfortable, it's probably because of many old habits of movement and standing that you've acquired over the years. You can begin to change that, but don't think, right, I've got to stand here like this if it's not comfortable. Try them out and then have, kind of move towards them. Again, hip width could be considered to be from the outside of your foot, so shoulders, hips, outside of the foot, and that gives you a stance about there. From the midline of the foot, giving you a slightly wider stance, or from the inside, giving you slightly wider again. I tend to favor this one. All three are found legitimately within the Tai Chi tradition. A lot depends on your hips and your body. The principle here is that your legs are in a position to truly support your hips and your shoulders, your upper body in general. If I'm standing like this, I've only got one leg supporting me and so on and so forth. If I'm standing like this is a great stance, but it lacks a bit of stability forwards and backwards. It's really good for training the legs. But mostly what we do is in this, what we call the Wu Chi stance. Here, you should find that you've got a little bit more mobility with an individual leg, because I can do this much more easily than I could do in a chair, because there's no weight in this hip, or at least the weight is moving through this hip. When I step forwards, one foot turns out, and what I want to imagine, and I'm going to use this to demonstrate this. I'm going to use it. I'm going to get it straight first of all. There you go, straight to the camera anyway. So if I'm here, I'm going to get it right. Yeah. I turn my right foot out and I step forwards to there. Not to here, because now I'm like a little bit wobbly. So I'm trying to maintain that step. And so what I want to do is this. I can try and swing that foot out. Sometimes it's more obvious, more pronounced than others. But I go back to there. I come in and it swings out. So it's much like the arm might swing from the shoulder. If you exaggerate it, as I do sometimes for demonstration purposes, it emphasizes the fact there's two directions. There's a forward direction and an outward direction. And again, knees should be soft, and you want to be able to push the foot gently into the ground. Now, this is slightly misleading, because in fact, when I do this, what I do is I have the toes slightly turned out, which some people do, not everybody, because that helps to open my hip, which means that here I'm more able to get my weight down. The back foot is already turned out. And when I take a step forwards, I come in and it's more pronounced, the curve. I come into here, and I might even put my toes down here to support myself, but it's just easier to hold the leg here than it is to hold it here. So it sweeps in and out. So you go in a slightly zigzag pattern, except it's quite curved. I think that probably covers everything for the start. There'll probably be something that that I've forgotten. The stances are there to help you to root down. Oh, the length of step, I need to do something here. So we take a shorter than normal step in Tai Chi, but that doesn't mean that. If I try and do the weight change here, I've got virtually no room to do it. And here is straining too much. So the emphasis on the weight strain, but you can see there's clear space between my back toes and my front heel. Quite often we find ourselves doing that as we get older because the muscles tend to dry up and shrink, which affects our walking. It means we end up, worst case scenario, is that we're kind of shuffling along like that and can hardly move, which means that when you may find that the proper length of step may feel a bit uncomfortable. You may just be pushing those muscles just a little bit too hard. Persevere with that, but be safe. Hold on to something so you can push out. Drink plenty of water, and the muscles will eventually revive themselves, and you'll start to be able to step a little bit longer. If you don't, you'll find that your step will get shorter and shorter. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Just in this upright stance, parallel stance, sinking down, the standing version of rooting down. And what we'll do is we'll combine these three exercises. So rooting down, adjust myself, and then the wild goose, and parting the clouds. I said at the beginning of the class, have a sense for what you need. I'm quite comfortable now in this stance. Other days you might see me a bit wider. There's all sorts of things that can actually cause variations, but a stiffness in your hip, tightness in your back, all sorts of things can affect that. Once you've got a sense for how it can feel, you're guided by that, and you arrange your body, as it were, to suit that. But always just have a nod to, but always check. You know, it can be misleading what I've just said. It might be, yeah, this feels quite comfortable. But of course, it's not the stance for the exercise. So within certain boundaries, you have a certain amount of leeway. So hip width, not here and not here. Toes pointing forwards and maybe slightly turned out, but not like this. Make sure that there's some kind of definite thing that you're doing with your feet. And then you'll find that the movements in the upper body will become much smoother. One more round. Okay, shake out. So 1 foot forwards, still with hip width and that comfortable length, and able to move your weight 60% into your front foot, and then when you go back, 70% into the back foot, but with the knee still slightly soft, not tight like that. So that is also going to affect the length of the step. It's also related to how far you can let your hips sink. Now, in other exercise forms, you'll find that there's an emphasis on kind of big stepping and stretching and things like that. I think that's a good thing. But really, this is a stance that enables us to move the weight and keep the body upright and conform to those Tai Chi principles that allow for the full exercises. We would only do stretching and things like that insofar as it served this purpose. That's not to say that stretching and so on is a bad thing, just that you have to understand why we're doing this. And then sinking back, settling in, raising your toes and your heel. This is where I turn the front foot out a little. and then just drawing in. So you can do it with that little sweep out. The other thing I sometimes say about this is just have a feeling of the leg contracting, and then it would tend to go more diagonal. But in the end, what we want to do is to sweep out and extend at the same time. You don't have to keep the foot up. You'll see me sometimes put that foot down if I feel I need the little bit of stability. And then on the other side, first of all, this is called the Bose Dance. And done like this, it's fixed step. Take your time. Don't start raising your toes and your heel. Get the basic step right. Do it in stages. Don't forget that feeling that I've talked about recently of your hips dropping back. It's not even a big movement of the weight. It's not a full movement of the weight. It's only 60% forwards. So even at its most extreme, it still gives you a stance where both legs, both feet are supporting your upper body. And then stepping in. This movement of the foot in and out reflects the pattern of yin yang. Yin drawing in, contracting, yang extending out. It's also easier to move your leg like this. So now stepping through, heel, toes, if you're going forwards, ball of the foot and heel if you're going backwards. Still that feeling of being drawn down by your hips. Extending the leg as far as you can without throwing the upper body offline. And then going back. And bring your feet down. So that's that combination of the stance and the movement of your weight without introducing any straining into it. Remember, I can do this and this means that when we do a movement like pushing away, which we're going to do in a moment, if I was pushing into something here, I'd still be in quite a strong position. I don't want to be like this. If you've ever tried to help somebody bump start a car or something like that, there's always a point where the car takes off and you're like, oh, you're scrambling along behind. We try and avoid that. Yeah, so I don't want to lean. So we retain both the strength of the body and enable the fluidity, because if the body is strong, not stiff, but has got that strength, then the movement can flow more easily. If I'm sort of like this, I'm blocking the movement. So sink back, bring your hands in front of your hips, turn your hands forwards, and just move forwards and let your arms curve up. And then sink back. So your hips sinking into the back and push up. Front toes point forward, you're pushing straight forwards. You don't want this, trying to push that this way and the foot out. But we can introduce to this, we can reintroduce to this the stepping that we've just been doing. So at the moment, toes and heels are fully on the ground. Don't start doing this. You can see I'm throwing myself offline, but I can sink back. I can just raise the toes, get a little bit more movement backwards. Don't do this. Keep the body upright. Toes are turned out slightly now, so I can go forward. I can raise the heel. I'm not doing this. I'm doing this. In the front, you can see that slight angle in my front foot shouldn't change the overall direction of the movement significantly. And then I can start to go in. So I push to here, raise the heel, and then I bring the foot in. turn the hands, sink back, raise the toes, come in. From the side, you see when I go forwards here, I raise the heel, and then as I bring the foot in, I can just get a little bit more forward energy. And when I come back, I can raise the toes and draw in a little bit. But I'm only going to get that if I'm comfortable in the supporting leg. It's no good being like this, and you'll just fall over. So this is how the stance has a massive effect. And also think about the length of the step. If you've gone into sort of doing this, you'll be wanting to do that, and everything will go out of line. You can only push as far as your stance allows you to. If you want to push more, we start with the feet. Okay. So once again, turn your hand, pushing away. And I'm emphasizing the strength of it because the term is inner strength. And if your body has that inner strength, you're much more comfortable, you're much more stable, you're not straining your body, you're working well within your capacity, and you can get the fluidity of movement. Then when we talk about strength, it's the strength of water, the fluidity of water, rather than like a rock or something like that that we're referring to in Tai Chi. It's the strength in the energy as much as it is in the physical body. And then raising your toes and your heel. And of course, strengthening the energy has a massive impact all around on our well-being, on our immunity, and with everything really, because that sense of energy, of movement, and that kind of interchange that happens within the body that involves any kind of energetic process will benefit from that strength. And then if you're comfortable, just moving in with the foot. Careful about placing the foot. Don't put it there, because suddenly you'll go all over the place. Well, I've chosen a fairly simple movement to do this with this time. If we were doing Windblows the Willows or something like that, it'd be much more difficult to focus on the feet. And bring your feet down. Excellent. Okay, go back to your chair. So I hope that's answered your question about the feet. It's quite a technical class again, but again, it's good to do that because if we only focus on certain aspects of the art, we're not getting a full view of the art. And Tai Chi is an art that I think my first teacher used to describe it as having three aspects. She talked about the martial, as in the martial art, the meditational, the mind training, and the medical, the health aspect. And in traditional Chinese understanding, they talk about the three treasures or the three jewels, and we can interpret those as mind in one form or another, broad meaning of that, the body, the physical body, and energy or movement, momentum. And if you think about, and I don't know, if you're a photographer and you use a tripod, it's got three legs on the tripod. If one leg is bent, it's not a very good tripod, and the camera is tilted over, and you don't get a good photograph. So this trinity of mind, body, energy, we have to try and develop all three aspects so that they can come together in the same way that the tripod comes together and holds the camera on the top. So don't think that just applying yourself to, I've had people say, I'm just interested in the flow, but take the flow out, and it's like you haven't got a tripod anymore. You've got a monopod, and that's not so easy to use. So to get the best out of this art, we work on all three elements. And sometimes that means focusing on one of them. So coming back to the center, that idea, I suppose, is reflected in, you could almost imagine that you've got, well, not a tripod, it'd be a quadrupod, but you've got four elements. So you've got your feet and your hips supporting your head. It's the same kind of idea, the kind of equilibrium between, I talked about that point of equilibrium between front and back, left and right earlier. So you're held in this posture. Just letting your arms hang down, and then embrace tiger, return to mountain. One more time. And okay, open your eyes. Oh, I thought I was going to run well over time. It's the trouble when you get into detail of these things. It does take up, it can easily sort of